Hello and welcome everybody to another edition of the Saturdays for the Byzantines podcast. My name is Professor Wren. I am your host. If you are finding this video on YouTube, please make sure to give us a thumbs up or a like, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another episode. If you are listening to this on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Google Play, or any other podcast platform, please make sure to give us a follow on there as well, so long as that's a thing you can do on your podcast platform of choice. And then also leave us a 5-star review, especially, Apple Podcasts is really the one where you can leave a 5-star review. So please make sure to do that there. You can also find us on Facebook and Instagram at Professor Wren, where I post updates to the show and any other thing about history that I think is interesting that I might want to share with you all, the viewers at home. So in today's lecture, I guess you could say, we are exiting the reign of Justinian. We spent a good several episodes there on Justinian, and now it is time to transition away from him. If you are interested in any information about Justinian, we did a whole boatload of lectures on them. Another one of our little mini-series here. We did sort of a mini-series on the fall of Rome and the age of migration, barbarian invasion, whichever you like to call that time period of history, which was really interesting. You can go back and listen to those episodes. And you can also go back and listen to the episodes where we talked a lot about Justinian. But for right now, we are going to talk about Justinian's successor. So the basic outline of this lecture, before I really get into it, we're going to talk about several of the successors of Justinian. It'll be Justin II, it'll be Tiberius, Maurice, and then Focus. And then we'll pick up next time with Heraclius, who is, in my opinion, kind of a tragic hero character, because he, as I'll kind of tease at the end of the episode, but I might as well mention it here as well. Heraclius has some real heroic feats, but at the same time is kind of a tragic character, which we'll certainly get into in depth when we talk about Heraclius. But for now, we will talk about Justin II. So the successor to Justinian, his nephew, that is Justin II, he ascends the throne in 565. Now, he was involved in the imperial court of Justinian. However, it seems that Justinian did not really trust him a great deal because he gave him limited responsibilities. He was not, his right-hand man at court, for example, was sort of, kind of tucked away, like, he's my little nephew here who his mom, my auntie, wanted me to bring along, but, we aren't really going to give him any major responsibilities. And you may be asking, why is it that Justinian, why did a son of Justinian not follow him to the throne? And the answer to that is that Justinian had no children, which may bring up a whole series of questions about Justinian and his personal life. But understand that Justinian, we know Justinian was exclusive with his wife Theodora. It's quite possible that there were simply fertility issues between either one of them. And because Justinian did not have a harem of women, which he, picked from at will, like many other emperors do, if there is a fertility issue with Theodora there's no one else he's got around to provide him an heir. And he wasn't like Henry VIII, just beheading his wives until one of them can give him a successor. Now, Justin's reign was certainly marked by neuroticism. It's clear that Justin had what we would call today some real mental health issues. To start off with, he became very obsessed with saving money. Quite the opposite from his uncle, because we know Justinian really was into spending money between his wars of expansion, his building projects, as well. The Corpus Juris Civilis was certainly not free. You have to pay scholars to work on that and all and whatnot. But by the time Justinian goes to his eternal resting place, it had that spending has put a real strain on the treasury, and he was in a fortunate situation because of his predecessor Anastasius, who left him a very fat cash cow to be working with. Now, also at the time of Justin II's ascent to the throne, you have the Avars, who are another one of these Central Asian nomadic groups similar to the Huns. The Avars are, we know more about the Avars than the Huns. I'm almost certain the Avars are a Turkic people. But they start pushing westward along the Danube River, out of the Romans' hair at the moment. They're on the north side of the Danube. But this also causes another Germanic group called the Lombards to move west as well. And the Lombards end up moving west into Italy. This is going to cause the Byzantines to lose a significant portion of their Italian holdings. Now, Justin as well inexplicably relieved the Armenian general Narses, who you'll remember from our episode on the Gothic Wars. He comes in at the tail ends of the Gothic Wars because Belisarius is off in the east, and there are some perhaps trust issues between Belisarius and Justinian in the later years. But Narses was a highly competent commander who really finished off the Ostrogoths, and for some reason, no one seems to really know why, Justin relieved Narses of his command in Italy, and without a strong commander there, the Byzantines lost much of the territory that they fought so hard for. You'll remember when we talked about Belisarius's initial campaigns in Italy, we said that after he left the first time, the commanders there resorted to a lot of infighting and squabbling, which left them open to a resurgence from the Ostrogoths. And it seems that after Narses leaves Italy as well, basically a very similar thing happens. I don't know what it was about the commanders there in Italy, but they were certainly prone to getting in their own way. The Byzantines also saw issues with attacks in North Africa by the Moors and by the Visigoths in Spain, which Justin does not address. He does not want to spend money, even though in Treadgold, and I'll just mention this now. Most of this episode, I am using Warren Treadgold's Concise History of Byzantium. I've mentioned it before on the show. I'll leave a link in the description to the Amazon page where you can buy it. It's pretty cheap. The nice thing about studying history is most of your sourcing, most of your books are pretty cheap. I remember in college as a history major, oftentimes spending less than $200 a semester on books, whereas my classmates and friends who were science majors, good Lord, some of them, sometimes spending $700 on books. So yeah, I certainly didn't envy them in that regard. And as I said, Justin could have spent a relatively small amount of money. And again, this is essentially what Treadgold says, to send small amounts of soldiers to North Africa and to Spain to kind of settle the situation there. And he just doesn't, because he's become obsessive with saving money at this point. However, Justin was very concerned with the situation in the East, and obviously here we're again talking about the Persians, which is odd because the Eastern Romans and the Persians are in a state of peace right now. And you'll remember Justinian worked very meticulously to secure a peace deal with the Persians in the East. However, Justin decided to break that peace deal, and as a result, the Persians sieged the frontier city of Dara and took it. Now, Dara had been the anchor of the Byzantine defenses in the east for quite some time, ever since the reign of Anastasius, who was emperor before Justinian. And this mistake would have consequences for some time to come, because really, to kind of give you a little preview of what's going to happen here, the next several emperors are all going to have issues with wars with the Persians. And one could make the argument that if Justin had just maintained the peaceful status with the Persians, which his uncle had set up for him, the years of wars between Persia and the Byzantines, I mean, it's entirely possible that peace would have broken down at some point, but there was no need to. There was no reason why Justin broke this peace treaty. It's not like, the Persians were threatening to attack, and he just wanted to have the upper hand. But this issue, especially of losing Dara, is going to become a big pain for the Byzantines, because they're going to have a lot of trouble getting it back. Now, when Dara fell, Justin realized that he made a serious mistake, and is at this point that, like I said, I think he, not to be an armchair psychologist, but one has to wonder if he had some underlying mental health issues already at this point in his life, and that the stress of the situation and realizing what a serious mistake he made in starting this war with the Persians really compounded the mental health problems that already existed, to the point where he attempted to take his own life. And it was at that point that his wife Sophia basically puts him under regency and really removes him from any sort of real authority in the empire. And they put him under the regency of a friend of his, who was the Count of the Exubitores, named Tiberius. And again, for those of you who may not remember, I've mentioned the Exubitores before here, but the Exubitores they're an elite, like imperial guard type unit in the Byzantine military. So, guy who's the head of that is going to be pretty highly competent. One of your better military leaders, and that guy is Tiberius. So Tiberius II, there was another Roman emperor named Tiberius back in the Julio-Claudian dynasty. That was all the cats can nap. That was how my high school Latin teacher taught us to remember the Julio-Claudian dynasty. That was so Augustus, I'm forgetting one of the T's here. Now I have to Google it. Augustus, Tiberius, there's only one T. Duh. Remember the acronym, right? Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero. Good job, Professor. Way to bring up a reference here and forget what it is. But yes, good old Mrs. D'Angelo taught us that in Latin. Julio Claudius. All the cats can nap. It's an acronym for Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero. Anyway, so Tiberius is another Thracian man. You'll notice here in this time period that we're talking about, I believe all but one of the emperors are going to be from some sort of Thracian background. Justinian had a Thracian background. Belisarius as well came from Thrace. Justin II was, and Justinian's uncle Justin, who brought him into the imperial court, also of a Thracian background. And the next couple of the next guys here, or at least one of the next guys here, we'll talk about, also was from Thrace. However, unlike Justinian, Tiberius's mother tongue seems to have been Greek, and as we said, Justinian was the last Roman emperor whose first language was Latin. Everyone after him, their first language is Greek, until we get to the point where, and although at this point, Latin is still the official administrative language of the Eastern Roman Empire, and it's escaping me which emperor officially makes the switch to Greek. But I believe at this time Latin is still the language of government, the administrative language in the empire. Now, Tiberius came into prominence in his war against the Avars. Now, what happened here was that Justin II stopped paying subsidies or tribute to the Avars, which Justinian had arranged. You all know my stance on paying tribute to barbarians. If you were listening back when we did our Barbarian Invasion series, or mini-series, but I'll just reiterate it for people who weren't around for that. I think it's a big waste of time and money, because you know, the Romans are sending these piles and piles of gold and whatever nice stuff, silver, trinkets. They send all these things to barbarians, and what inevitably ends up happening, the barbarians attack anyway. So you might as well just not pay them the subsidies, keep the money for yourself, and use it to fight the war against them, which you're going to inevitably fight anyway. So that would be a point of difference that I would have with Justinian. But, you know, I'm not a Roman emperor, so if I was at court with Justinian, you know, he was known as being very strong-willed, but I certainly would have been very vocal about my disagreements with him on this. But anyway, so negotiations broke down. So after Justin decides to stop paying tribute to the Avars, he does try to negotiate. There's something about a hostage exchange. Justin wanted the children of the Avars Khan to be the hostages. They did not agree to that. The negotiations broke down, and war breaks out. And so Justin sends Tiberius to go deal with the issue, which he did, and this brought him into Justin's good graces. They apparently became friends, and just Tiberius, they gave him the title of Caesar, which, but in more practical terms, he was really ruling as Justin's regent from beginning in 574 until Justin took his own life in 578. So he earlier, as we said, unfortunately, he attempted to take his own life, and then in 578 he ended up taking his own life. So a very tragic ending for him indeed. Now, Tiberius, as a career military man, wanted to bring the wars with the Persians to a swift end. Now, in doing so, he spent much of the money. He spent much of the money which Justin had saved up before him. We mentioned that he was kind of a neurotic saver. What Tiberius does is he buys himself a 4-year truce to make preparations for a surge against the Persians. And when war broke out, he chooses as the general to lead the fight there a guy named Maurice. We'll talk about more here in a minute. And Maurice won a number of impressive victories against the Persians. However, the Persians hold out. Even though they've been defeated a number of times, they're not willing to come to the negotiating table. They're not willing to talk about a peace treaty. And, you can't necessarily blame them, because they had just been in a pretty agreeable state of peace before, and the Byzantines completely blew it up. So who's to say that, that's not going to happen again? And why would you trust these people after they just did this? I kind of understand it from the Persian perspective. Tiberius even actually, he offers to trade the lands which were taken by Maurice. I believe most of those were in Armenia, in exchange for Dara, because that was really the goal, right? The goal of the Byzantines at this point in time is to get the city of Dara back so that they can have that defensive anchor against the Persians in the east. However, the Persians don't budge. They won't come to the negotiating table. Now, unfortunately for the Byzantines, Tiberius falls seriously ill before any serious progress can be made during this campaign. Maurice was out on campaign, but however, he was recalled to Constantinople as the emperor was dying. And before Tiberius dies, he has Maurice marry his daughter, and which basically sets him up to be, to be the next emperor. And not too long after that, Tiberius dies, and Maurice ascends to the imperial throne in 578. Now, Maurice has he really has a mixed bag. There are some things where I really like him, and then there are some things, is one thing really in particular, well, I guess you could say two things, where he's really boneheaded, where he's really just like, you look at him and it's like, why? That's an awful, like, making awful decisions, not learning from his past mistakes. Maurice is really, he's a mixed bag, I have to say. He does have a fairly long reign. He comes in here in about half down here 582, but Tiberius does die in 578. So I believe I have a bit of a typo here. But he's on the throne until 602. But so either way, he's got about a 12 to 15 year reign here. He was born, so here we have an exception to our trend here of Thracian emperors. Maurice was born in Cappadocia. And he does realize that the empire is in a pickle. Obviously, he's the lead general out there against the Persians in the east, and the Byzantines are also dealing with in the west. The Avars and the Slavs are raiding into the Balkans and Greece still as well. So he's dealing with it on opposite ends of the empire. And at one point in time, he does try to move, because really, as we've been talking about here, a lot of times the emperors they're trying to concentrate all of their resources in the east in their wars against the Persians, really neglecting things that are going on in the west, either in the newly acquired or newly reconquered provinces in the west or in the Balkans. Now, we do need to keep in mind that of all the areas in the Eastern Roman Empire, the Balkans are really they're not a major area. They're not a major population center. They're not a major center of wealth. Even though Constantinople is in Europe, it's incredibly well protected. No one really has a fighter's chance of breaking into that city at this point in time. It's not going to be until gunpowder is invented that anyone's got a real shot at getting in there. And Syria and Egypt and coastal Anatolia, that's really where the money is being made. That's where the population centers are. So the things that are going on in the Balkans, they're not necessarily top priority, but still, you obviously don't want to have these raids going on. However, so Maurice does kind of break the trend from previous emperors, and he sends forces, reinforcements really, I should say, to the Balkans to help deal, or to try to help deal with the Slavs and the Avars. However, they don't really help. He sends in reinforcements, and they're not making any progress against the Slavs and the Avars. They're losing. Now, in a foolhardy attempt, now this is where I really sour on Maurice. In a foolhardy attempt to save money in these costly wars, Maurice declared that the soldiers' equipment would be supplied by the state, and that their allowance to buy their own arms, which was instituted back by Anastasius, would be ended. Now, to just kind of refresh everyone's memory, or if you weren't listening back when we talked about Anastasius, the Emperor Anastasius came up with this policy whereby the Byzantine Empire would not directly provide soldiers with like standard issued weapons and armor. What they would do is they would provide soldiers with a stipend to buy their own weapons and armor and supplies and that sort of thing. And if they had any money left over, they could keep it. And this was apparently a pretty good deal for the soldiers, because I mean, you see, they got very upset about this. So obviously this was a significant source of income for them. And just, I mean, obviously, generally speaking, you don't want to mess around with soldiers' pay. You know, I was critical in our Justinian episodes when we talked about how he wasn't paying the soldiers in like Italy, for example, due to financial constraints. But still, I mean, not paying soldiers or cutting soldiers' pay is never a good idea. You get disgruntled soldiers, and in this case, you actually get a full-on mutiny. So this, and in the East as well. I mean, this is, and as I said, in Syria, what we're talking about here, which is one of the more important areas of the empire, because Antioch is a huge city, it's a patriarchal see, big population center, lots of trade goes on in Syria and Antioch specifically. So you end up with rogue armies raiding through Syria, which give the Persians a perfect opportunity to make headway. They take some Byzantine territory in eastern Syria, and as well, they also the general raiding and that sort of thing, causing all sorts of problems. Now, fortunately for Maurice, the leader who was elected for this rebellion was loyal to the empire, and he rallies the soldiers to beat back the Persians, though not all of the territory that the Persians take there is regained, but order is restored. The mutiny is kind of quelled. Maurice basically backs off this policy of removing the soldiers' stipend to buy their own equipment, and then keeping whatever was left over. And things are looking all right for now. Now, an interesting thing comes up here for Maurice and the Byzantines. So, the Byzantines do happen upon some luck here on the Persian front, and that is Persian rebellions. Now, at this point in time, the Persian wars have been going on for about 18 years, and just as the Byzantines are growing tired of the war, so are the Persians. If you think about it, even today, for example, the United States, Joe Biden is talking a lot about pulling all the troops out of Afghanistan, and the United States war in Afghanistan has been going on for like 20 years. And many people have, in the United States, I'll speak only for the United States because that's where I live. I don't know if there's a similar sentiment in Australia or the UK or anywhere else in Europe. But people in the United States have, for the most part, grown tired of the war. And so the Persians in this situation, the first thing they do is they ran their emperor or king or whatever you want to call him. I think it's probably more fitting to call him an emperor. It is, even though it's not the Persian Empire of old, it's still an empire, I would say. But they replaced their old king with his son, whose name I'm going to try my best to pronounce this. I'm not familiar with Persian or Farsi or what have you. But his name was Khusrau. However, soon after they put Khusrau on the throne, they run him out of town as well and replace him with a general named Bahram. Now, Khusrau fled Persia to Byzantine territory and asked Maurice for help to get himself back on the throne. And what he says to Maurice is, if you help me get back on the throne, I, as Persian emperor, will give you back Dara, give you the city of Martyropolis, which was one of the cities taken when the Persians broke through during that mutiny I mentioned earlier, and then as well most of Armenia. A lot of the fighting that's been going on at this point in time has been over Armenia, which sometimes was controlled by the Byzantines and sometimes was controlled by the Persians, although I would say the people in Armenia probably lean more Byzantine than Persian because Armenia was a Christian kingdom, remains predominantly Christian today. And Khusrau also offers the Byzantines the protectorate over Iberia, which was an area kind of on the black. I believe today it's essentially what is now Georgia, although I could be wrong about that. Now, Bahram offered Maurice Dara, Martyropolis, and Nisibis. Nisibis was a city which would today be in, I believe, northern Iraq or eastern Syria. But Bahram offered Maurice those three cities if he would just not interfere and let Bahram take care of Khusrau himself. And it seems that Maurice believed that Khusrau's offer was one that he simply could not refuse, to make a little Godfather reference there. And this will not be the only Godfather reference I make today. Godfather is just, it's probably my favorite movie. I was watching earlier today, the baptism scene from The Godfather. And it's one of the greatest scenes in film. It might be the best scene in all of film. But so Narcissus, sorry, not Narcissus. I'm going to talk about him here in a second. Maurice's choice ends up working out fairly well. He sends Narcissus at the head of a large army to help Khusrau get back onto the Persian throne. Narcissus and his army take back a number of cities, which were lost to the Persians along the way. They crush Bahram and reinstate Khusrau on the Persian throne. So now they have a friendly monarch over there in Persia. The war is essentially over. They get back the cities that they wanted to get back. Khusrau he stays true to his word. He gives back Dara, Martyopolis, and a lot of Armenia and Iberia. Now, Maurice's next item on his to-do list was to finish the war with the Slavs. Now, we just had good Maurice. Now we're about to have another bad Maurice situation. Now, in order to save money here, and he's always looking to cut corners with the military. This is kind of my bugaboo with him, or whatever you want to call it. But in order to try to save some money during this campaign against the Slavs, what he does is, instead of fighting the Slavs in Byzantine territory, he sends the army north of the Danube to attack the Slavs in their homeland. Because understand, these are raids. Now, some of the Slavs are settling in Byzantine territory, but there's still a lot of them who are raiding in Byzantine territory and going back across the Danube River and living there like permanently. And so what Maurice is trying to do is he's trying to attack them on their home territory to get them out of Byzantine territory, which is not a terrible idea. However, the issue is going to become that Maurice also orders the army to make winter quarters north of the Danube and to live off the land, so he and the Byzantine Empire do not have to pay to support them during that winter. Now, this is obviously unpopular. Scavenging and armies living off the land is not exactly easy. Sometimes there's food, sometimes there isn't. Sometimes people are not willing to give a foreign army their food. It's a very less than desirable situation. Living off the land is what caused Hannibal's campaign to derail in Italy. Now, at the same time, Maurice also very, very stupidly again ends the allowance for soldiers to buy their weapons and armor. And the soldiers threaten to mutiny again. And when the commander of the army, which was north of the Danube, promised to pay the difference in income for the soldiers out of his own pocket, Maurice dismissed him from his command, and I replaced him, I think, with a guy named Priscus. But this is really, why? Why would you do that? Like, this guy is offering to pay out of his own pocket. It's not coming out of the imperial treasury. Like, what difference does it make to you? Like, the soldiers are going to be happier anyway because they're being paid, the same amount. They're not having to take a pay cut, and you just get rid of this guy. Not only is that, it doesn't make any sense. It's not making you more popular with the soldiers, and you're relieving a general who clearly has the best interest of his soldiers at heart, which is only going to put you in a worse situation with the military. Now, fortunately for Maurice, the soldiers, although they do threaten to mutiny, don't mutiny this time. Instead, they do fight valiantly. They defeat both the Slavic and the Avar foes, kind of relieving them of raids for the time being. However, again, Maurice orders the army to take winter quarters north of the Danube. This is a second time. And maybe they would have put up with it. However, there was an extraordinarily bad winter, very bad conditions, and this brought the men to revolt. Now, apparently, and this according to Treadgold, Maurice's brother, whose name was Peter, was in command of the army here in question, north of the Danube, and he considered ignoring this order and basically saying, like, not paying attention to what Maurice said and bringing the army back into friendly territory for the winter, especially with the harsh winter conditions. However, he understood that if he were to do this, he just would have been dismissed he would have been dismissed from his command, replaced, and they would have had to do it anyway. And so after that happens, the army basically promotes a subordinate officer whose name was Phocas. He was like a junior general, I guess you could say. And they're in full revolt. They put Phocas as their new leader, and they march on Constantinople. So Phocas and his rebel army, again, marching towards Constantinople, and Maurice realizes at this point that he has lost any support. The military no longer supports him, and when you're a Byzantine emperor, when you're a Roman emperor, or really any ancient or medieval leader, king, prince, if you don't have support of a military, then you really have no power at all. And so Maurice attempts to flee the city. However, he was captured by the rebels and executed along with his brothers and 5 of his sons. However, one son does escape, or supposedly escapes, which we'll talk about here in a second. But this is also, I find this a very Michael Corleone style where, as I mentioned earlier, in the baptism scene, he takes out the heads of the 5 families, eliminating any threats to his power. The same way here, Phocas is taking out not just Maurice, but all of the men in his family to eliminate threats to his power. Now, Phocas is another Thracian here. He's born in 547, excuse me. And he has a shorter reign. He's only in power from 602 until 610. And not much is known about his life before his usurpation, other than he was a career soldier. Sorry if that sound was unpleasant. And now the real issue for Phocas is that his reign was as a usurper. He was, an illegitimate emperor. He had no legal claim to the throne. He also had no real. Seems like he probably was not very well educated. Didn't have a lot of experience with governing. Didn't have a lot of knowledge of the law. And although he was a good soldier, clearly had the respect of the men who served under him. That's not the only thing that makes you a good leader, especially a leader of a whole empire. And many of the people who were in the imperial court from the previous Emperor Maurice, the holdovers in the imperial court, either did not recognize him as emperor because, again, he had no legal claim to the throne, he was a usurper, or they feared that they would have him, or that Phocas would deal with them the same way that he dealt with Maurice and his family. They were all afraid that he would kill them, and he did kill, I believe it was Maurice's wife or daughter and his old father-in-law or something. They attempted to conspire against him, and he had them tonsured to monasteries, and then they attempted to conspire against him a second time, after which he had them executed. That's reasonable. Kind of the fool me once, shame on you; fool me twice, shame on me, kind of thing. These palace intrigues, often they have to be dealt with pretty seriously. Now, here's the interesting part about Phocas and his reign here. Now, I mentioned earlier that supposedly one of the members of Maurice's family escapes. It's a guy named Tiberius. I believe this is his youngest son. And the story goes that Tiberius fled to the court of Khusrau, the Persian emperor, who his father helped restore to the throne in Persia. And he sought his aid basically to get himself, again, Tiberius, back on the throne the same way that Khusrau helped, or the same way that Khusrau was helped by Maurice get back on the Persian throne. So kind of, we scratched your back, now it's time for you to scratch our back. And both Khusrau and Narses, remember the old Byzantine Armenian general, marched in opposition to Phocas. Neither of them recognized Phocas as a legitimate emperor, and so they both were in opposition to him. Now, the plot does twist here because Phocas claims that he had found Tiberius and killed him later on, separately from when he killed the rest of Maurice's family. However, Narses and Khusrau both claim that Tiberius was under their protection, and essentially in some sort of witness protection program. So you have, on one hand, Phocas saying that he's dead, and on the other hand, you've got Narses and Khusrau saying, no, he's still alive. We know where he is. We're hiding him and protecting him. It definitely gives off kind of a Romanov vibe, right? The one family, family member who has escaped and is sort of living in protected obscurity. Are they alive? Are they not alive? Definitely has a very Anastasia Romanov type vibe. Although I don't subscribe to the idea that Anastasia Romanov survived the massacre of the Romanovs, but that some people had for years theorized that she had survived, and there was that one woman, I think, in France who claimed that she was Anastasia Romanov. It's just not possible, because how does anyone escape from a basement massacre in the middle of the frozen Russian wilderness? It doesn't make any sense. But it's a similar type story is the point I'm trying to make. Now, during all of this chaos that's going on with, is Tiberius alive? Is he not alive? Narses is a Byzantine general who's trying to fight back against the Byzantine usurper, and we're getting the Persian emperor involved to try to get the deposed Byzantine prince back on the throne and all of this. The Exarch of Africa sends forces to claim the imperial title for his family. Now, for those of you who don't know, and I haven't brought it up yet on the program, but the Exarch an Exarch is a leader of an exarchate. And an exarchate was a military and civil administrative region which the Byzantines created that had a good deal of autonomy. The Byzantines set this up there's an exarch in Africa, Italy. I think there was one in Syria, not Syria. I believe there was one in Sicily at one point in time, in Spain as well. This is basically a way to kind of relieve some of the pressure on the Byzantine state of governing all of these areas. And they were, I mean, almost independent. Basically, an exarch was kind of like a governor who had, if I'm remembering this correctly, both civil and military authority in his particular area, and he basically was tasked with governing it. And the only they really just still were part of the Byzantine Empire, paid taxes to the Byzantine Empire, owed loyalty to the emperor, and all of that. But apart from that, the emperor himself is not really dealing with any sort of governance in these exarchates. But like I said, the Exarch of Africa starts sending military forces into this whole big mess to try to get him and his family on the imperial throne. So this Exarch of Africa was a guy named Heraclius. And so first he sends his nephew Nicetas overland, so from North Africa across Libya to Egypt with an army, where he fights Phocas and defeats him. And then later on, he sends his son, Heraclius, so this would be like Heraclius the Younger. He sends his son with the navy to Constantinople to complete their overthrow, so to speak. And so in 610, Heraclius the Younger does enter Constantinople. He has Phocas executed and proclaims himself emperor, and he does indeed become emperor. I can understand maybe if you have to question, like, well, how is this guy a usurper? Or how would Heraclius not be a usurper, but Phocas was? And the answer to that really is that Phocas was kind of, a lower level, like I said, junior officer, whereas Heraclius comes from a family that's already in power in the Byzantine Empire, and so it's not a stretch to extend the recognition from Exarch of Africa to the emperor. And now, like I mentioned at the beginning of the lecture, Heraclius is going to show a great deal of courage. I find him pretty impressive, but at the same time, he's also fairly tragic. Essentially, what's going to happen is there's going to be a massive Persian invasion. Much of Byzantine territory is going to be lost. Heraclius is going to make a big comeback, win a lot of it back, but at that point in time, things are fractured to the point where it's like the fissure in the house of Usher. It's only a matter of time until that thing comes down. And it's going to happen sooner rather than later. But that's where we're going to wrap up this week's lecture. I hope you all enjoyed. I do apologize for not doing midweek videos. Sometimes you're just not feeling quite as creative. I had some traveling to do on Sunday and Monday, which kind of got in the way of some of the time that I usually use to plan midweek episodes. But so hopefully this week I'll be able to put out at least one, kind of get back in the groove of that. If you've made it this far in the video, please make sure to give us a like, subscribe to the channel if you are new, and hit the notification bell so you never miss another episode. Also, if you're listening on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or Google Play, please make sure to give us a follow there, and especially on Apple Podcasts, give us a 5-star review. We are on Instagram and Facebook. You can check us out at Professor Wren, where I post updates to the show and any other interesting things about history that I want to share with you guys. And so that's it for this time, and I'll see y'all on the next one.